It's no secret that chess is a complex game overall, and calculating variations is one of the key elements for improving, beating strong opponents, and increasing your rating. And time and again I see amateurs struggling because they can't calculate certain variations, can't visualize moves in their heads, and therefore fail to see the threats posed by their opponents. Today, I've highlighted the main rules for you that will help you improve your calculation of variations and accordingly assist you during your games. My name is Kirill Klukin and I am an international master. Let's get started. I'll explain the main rules using specific examples. And after that, we'll reinforce everything with practice, where I'll play a game and comment live, sharing my thoughts as I go. Of course, it's no secret that you can improve your tactical vision by solving puzzles. There's no way around it. And today, you'll also find out that these rules will help you solve puzzles better as well. Where should you always start your thinking process? First of all, the simplest thing you can do is to check the material on the board. It's basic, right? Count the number of pieces. If you're behind or significantly behind, it's clear that you need to take decisive action. There's no point in just standing still anymore. That means you need to go on the attack, look for some options. You can't trade pieces because all of that will just lead to your defeat. Now the most important thing, after you've already checked the material, now I'll explain step by step how, without evaluating the position, this all relates to strategic play. This could be the topic of a separate video. Today we're only talking about tactics. After your opponent's move, the first thing you need to do is figure out whether you're being threatened or not. And if something is threatened, don't rush to defend against it. Leave that for later. The main thing is not to forget about it and not to overlook anything. What should you consider from your own side? First and foremost, we look at active continuations. What counts as active continuations? First, captures, second, checks, third, attacks on the opponent's pieces. And ideally, at first you should do all this in order. Consider all possible moves that fall into these categories, even those you might not like. So regarding this position, what do we see? Right now, white is down a pawn and black has a pinned bishop. Always try to note any little details in the position, and sometimes not so little, anything special that might have an impact. Let's go in order. We start with captures. What captures are available for white in this position? Of course, we also look at threats. Nothing is threatening white specifically right now. Let's start with captures. What do we have? There's a capture on e4. Does it give us anything or not? Visualize it in your mind. Rook takes e4, queen takes e4. That's it. We calculate the lines. As long as everything is forced, as long as there are captures or checks, we calculate the lines to the end. And if nothing works out for us, if we don't find any active continuations, we'll just make a move that improves the position of our pieces. Let's keep looking. What checks do we have? We have a check with knight to g6, but it's not clear yet what that gives us. Among attacking moves, we have f3, which seems to put pressure on the pin. It looks very logical. But again, after the move f3, we don't stop our calculation. We see that black will play bishop to d5 and in response attack our queen. If we take on e7, they will take on a2. And if after the move f3, bishop to d5, we try to capture on d5 in between, they will recapture with the knight and defend their queen. Everything works out for them. Now again, we try to note the features of the position, as I mentioned. We have a rook on the h-file, which is generally semi-open. There's only the opponent's pawn there. Our king is in place, the knight is in place, and it seems unclear what to do. The queen, from a distance, takes away the g8 square from the king. Let's look closely. Because of this, the move knight to g6 is very interesting. We don't dismiss it, let's check it again. Also, finding and double-checking different lines can help you improve your tactical vision. Even if you've calculated something and it didn't work out, calculate it again. So knight to g6, taking with the bishop is not possible because the queen would be lost. The only capture left is with the pawn, and now the h-file opens up very strongly. So what do we need to do to attack the king? Move our king out of the way. Hallelujah. So the correct move in this position is knight to g6. Black captures with the pawn on g6 and the king moves to g1. The black king is checkmated. Let's move on to the second example. As you may have already realized, we never choose from just one move. We should always have some candidate moves. Candidate moves are the moves from which we actually make our choice. Let's look at the next position. Once again, white is down a pawn. This already pushes us toward taking some active measures. Plus, once again, we start by considering certain nuances that might help us. The black king has advanced pawns and our queen looks pretty good along this diagonal, right? And the knight is also well placed in the center. It can move forward somewhere. There's a weak square on f6, which black is still controlling for now. Is anything threatening us? No. We check active continuations, look at captures. Of the captures, we only have the moves rook to d7 and queen to c6, but we can immediately rule out queen to c6. As for checks, We only have moves with the queen and the knight, but all those squares are currently covered, so there's no point in playing them. We can dismiss them right away. And then there's attacking. We probably have an interesting move, knight to d6, right? Attack the rook moves somewhere. And after that, the only thing we can do is maybe capture the bishop, which hasn't been developed. A bad exchange that definitely doesn't suit us. And as for captures, well, we've already mentioned the move rook to d7. Now let's take a closer look. Why might we need the move rook to d7? Well, first of all, to eliminate the defender of the f6 square so that we have the opportunity to move our knight there. Let's start calculating the variations. If we play rook to d7, black can't capture with the queen because knight to f6 is a fork and we take the queen. So after the move rook to d7, black is forced to capture with the bishop. We play knight to f6, the king moves to f8. We play knight to h7, king to g8. There's no continuation, the queen can't break through, so we're forced to repeat the position. Let's go back and check again. Rook to d7, bishop takes on d7, knight to f6, king to f8. We take on d7 with the knight, queen takes on d7, there's a check with the queen on h8, the king escapes to e7. Is it really that nothing works? We've looked at captures, at forced continuations. Let's check again. Rook to d7, bishop takes on d7, knight to f6, king to f8. Where can the knight jump to? We can see that there's an idea. If our knight weren't on f6, we could deliver mate on h8, so we need to move our knight to d5, attacking the queen that's on e7. And if black captures us, we go and deliver mate on h8. If the queen moves anywhere, we also deliver mate on h8, because the knight is also controlling the e7 square. Let's break it down. So rook to d7, bishop takes d7, knight to f6, king to f8, knight to d5. A brilliant move. You could give it 2 exclamation marks. If the queen moves somewhere or captures, it's mate on h8. Or if the king moves away, we capture the queen. White has a winning position. Here's the third example. Soon I'll show you how real professionals think. Here's the third example. Let's go! This is a situation we're already familiar with. There's no pawn which pushes us towards some active moves, and now there's a threat. Our bishop on b2 is under attack, and we need to keep that in mind. So there's the option to capture on g7 with the bishop, and then black takes back with the rook, right? They've probably set up a defense here. We have a lot of pieces involved in the attack, which is also something we definitely need to notice. There's the option to capture on e6 with the queen, but we probably need to dismiss that idea right away, don't we? Because black takes back with the queen and we have no way to continue the attack. The forcing moves are over. There's the capture on g6 with the rook, which we need to calculate, and there's the capture on h5 with the rook, which we also need to consider and see what comes of it. Among the checks, rook to h5 stands out, right? That's a possible attacking move. There don't seem to be any other obvious threats we could create here. So essentially, among the active continuations, our choice is between taking on g7. But we've already realized that doesn't lead anywhere. Or rook to g6 and rook to h5. Let's start calculating. Let's look at the move rook to h5. After all, we want to break through somehow along the h-file. What will we get? Rook to h5? Well, if the king moves away, that's good for us, right? So rook to h5, exclamation mark, h5. We see that the rook can't cover because we'll take with the queen on h6. The bishop is pinning the other bishop. But if after rook to h5, g takes h, queen takes h5, the king moves to g8. Where is our continuation for attack? Do we have it? E. There is a capture of the rook on g7, it seems. But there they take the rook on g7 and everything grows together because the queen on e8 is protected. Nothing works, unfortunately. Let's move on to checking the next move. Rook to g6, rook to g6, rook to g6, rook to h5, the king moves to h8. And there it is. Now we have 2 pieces on the h-file and we can give a check. Again, we are checking exactly these kinds of moves, forced ones. Rook to h8. We calculate everything up to the point, up to the moment when we run out of checks. Bishop to h8, queen to h8. Checkmate. The bishop protects the queen from afar. Voila. And we win this game. And now I'll show you in the final example how I was thinking recently during Title Tuesday in a very limited time control. Let's go. In this round, I was playing against an international master. And at that moment, I had 13.5 seconds left before I would run out of time. Here, you only get 1 second added after each move. And again, I want to point out that, of course, the way masters and grandmasters think is very different from the way amateurs think, right? Strange as it may seem, but that's what you should strive for. Strong players try to notice certain features in just fractions of a second, find ideas, and then, based on that, work out possible lines and calculate them. In other words, they avoid considering a huge number of moves in detail, and instead try to extract the essence and calculate only that. Here I see, considering I have 13.5 seconds, friends, just imagine. My opponent has an extra exchange, well, for a pawn or something, right? And they do. But the queen side is asleep, the king is very poorly placed, and in defense he basically only has a bishop and a rook. So what move am I considering here? There's no time to look at all the captures, all the threats, all the checks. I need to go on the attack immediately. Here I find the move queen to h1. A queen sacrifice, found and calculated in 8 seconds. Because after rook takes h1, I recapture with my rook on h1 threatening mate. Rook to h8, king to g7, with a knight check on h5, a double check. So something needs to be done. If you take on f6, then bishop to f6, and there's no defense against mate on h8. The only thing that could be tried was to play bishop to b4, to open a path for the king. But then the knight joins the attack. Now there's the threat of rook to h8, king to e7, knight to f5. But if you play bishop to d5, then knight takes on d5. Again, I've taken away the e7 square. Any attempt to free the king leads to pawn to g6, king to e8, rook to h8, bishop to f8, bishop to d6. I can't say I calculated all of this to the end, but on a conceptual level, I saw something like this. And of course, all the moves are simple. I would have found them. But instead of capturing the queen, my opponent played rook to g8 and ended up getting checkmated in 2 moves. I hope it's become clear to you how to properly calculate variations. And now I'll show this in practice as well. I'll play a game and comment on it, especially for you, trying to explain each of my moves. Now, dear friends, let's try to reinforce all of this in practice. I'll play a game, explain each of my moves, and talk about how you should calculate during a game. And also share some other ideas as well. Let's try to play something maybe a bit more sharp. My opponent responds to e4 with nc6. In my opinion, that's not the best option. Well, okay, we'll punish him for that. A mistake is made right away. The queen comes out to the center at the start of the game. Maybe he has some kind of preparation here. No, but for now I'm not doing anything particularly complicated, just developing my pieces. Of course, in the very opening, calculating variations is often pointless. That's it. There are some common traps, but the main thing in the opening is to stick to general principles. Let's take control of the center. d4, opening up the dark-squared bishop, and then I want to castle. I castle. The pin here doesn't really bother me much. Or more precisely, I'm not worried about my opponent being able to take my knight, which would give me doubled pawns. Because overall I end up with a strong center. Plus, I might also have an attack on the king side here. You can already see it taking shape here. If you haven't watched the video about the 6 typical checkmates, you definitely should. If you haven't watched it, turn it on now. I'm proving in practice that it works. When we're calculating some lines, let me remind you that first and foremost, we deal with our opponent's threats. And if there are none, we look for our own active continuations first. First and foremost, consider captures. And to make it easier for yourself to spot tactics and calculate certain lines, first of all, practicing typical positions will help you, solving tactics, puzzles, anything and everything you can find. And, of course, watching my videos. So here you should take on h7 with the bishop without hesitation. Because the typical idea is that after the move king to h7, we play knight to g5, and then the queen comes out to h5, helping us attack. The king might try to escape to g6, but then the queen joins in on g4 after the knight moves, and various discovered attacks become a threat. The king is in a very dangerous position there, which ends in checkmate. I'll definitely show you after the game. The opponent doesn't capture, which means he just ends up with an extra pawn and a continuing attack. Well, let's go with knight to g5. I want to play queen to h5 to bring my queen into the attack. He can play g6, of course, try to catch it, but then I still bring my queen in. I want to place it on h4 so that eventually my bishop can retreat. If the king moves to g7 now, I still put the queen on h4, and then at some point I prepare to jump the knight to e6 so I can play queen to h6 with the bishop joining in. Again, I'm planning all of this in advance, yes. This move was generally expected. By the way, it's interesting because after queen to h4, my opponent will probably play knight to f5. I can't retreat anywhere now, but I have to play queen to h4 anyway. That is, to go along the h-file. No, he doesn't play knight to f5, although he definitely should have because he needed to drive the queen away from here. He absolutely had to do that. And now the most interesting part begins because there are all sorts of possible tactics here. Here we go again. Nothing is threatening us, right? Let's check, first and foremost, the active moves. So what captures do we have here? There's a capture on f7 and there's a capture on g6. Let's discard the first ones we don't like. Yeah, capturing on f7 isn't very good because the opponent can take with the king, and if anything, he can escape. Let's rule that out right away. Bishop takes on golf 6 is a better capture because at least it opens a path for the queen to hotel 7, which could also come in handy. But we need to calculate. Let's say we take on g6, knight takes g6. We keep calculating the lines until everything is resolved, right? Forcing, the queen goes to h7, the king escapes to f6. There's some check, knight to e4 is the first that comes to mind, and the king runs to e6. Of course, the king's position there is still dubious, but just in case, let's keep this line in mind. That's it for captures in general. Taking on e5 can be disregarded because it doesn't help the attack in any way. Now let's look at all sorts of discovered moves, checks. There's a check with the knight on e6. There's a check with the queen on h6, but the queen check on h6 doesn't really give us anything here. No matter how nice it looks to open up your bishop, but knight to e6 is worth considering, although after knight e6, the opponent can capture with their pawn, which basically allows them to escape further. So we also rule this out. So what is the strongest move here then? What other continuations are there? In any case, we need to look for ways to open a path for our queen. There's the move bishop to bishop golf 8. Which is interesting, so you can put your queen on hotel 7 and prevent the rook from going to hotel 8, in other words, to carry out your idea. If you play bishop golf 8, they have to capture with the knight, queen hotel 7, king foxtrot 6, and again he runs away. Knight echo 4, king echo 6. And there are many options, and of course the attack will probably still work, but I want something really forcing here to finish off the opponent somehow. So if the knight goes to e4, then yes, knight to f5, and overall the queen moves to h3. And then what? Rook to h8, right? Still not satisfied? We need to bring more pieces into the attack urgently. Can the dark squared bishop get into the game? That's an interesting question. You could take on e5 so that the bishop, if needed, could come out to f4 or e3 and join the attack. Also, I still think there must be some kind of knight retreat, a very advantageous one, which isn't visible yet, or maybe a bishop retreat. But again, it seems like we've checked all the lines, calculated everything to the end, and haven't missed anything. Once more, if we check the move knight to e6, he takes with the pawn, and then he has the chance to escape with his king. Okay, so we just keep pressing the attack. We just keep attacking, and for example, let's take the pawn on e5. Since none of the other lines work, knight to f5 was played, and the queen moves to h3. That's all good. Overall, the knight doesn't seem to have any good squares to jump to here, nowhere useful to go. Plus, if he doesn't take the pawn on e5, that restricts his king and doesn't let it escape anywhere. We just need to chase the knight away so it stops controlling the h6 square, then things will be perfect. So here, we can push with g4 and force the knight to move somewhere. In other words, we've checked all the tactics before this, and none of them worked. So we keep attacking the opponent, bringing in as many pieces as possible and pushing our pawns forward. Now, after the knight moves away, we need to check the knight e6 forks again, because now the king can no longer escape to the f6 square, but he can still run away through f7. If I play knight to e6, he'll take with the pawn. Knight to a6 is a mistake because it falls right under attack, and now knight to e6 is definitely good since I open up my bishop, who joins the attack on a6. And if the king takes on h7, then I take with the queen on h6, the king moves to g8, and I deliver mate on g7. But if the bishop takes, then I simply deliver mate in one move with queen to a6. Now let's always check with analysis. First of all, try to review your games yourself, analyze them, write something down on paper, and then check it with the computer. But for me, for us, to save a bit of time, we'll check everything with the computer. Alright, okay, let's go. We're interested in this moment right after I castled, that is bishop to h7. Actually, that's not the strongest move I made, it's a typical decision, but it would have been stronger to play knight to g5, simply bringing another piece into the attack. Bishop to h7 is also a possible move according to the computer, and I'm showing a possible variation. So king to h7, knight to g5, king to g6, the only move. Queen to g4, f5, and I would go queen to h3 or queen to h4, luring the rook to h8, and then queen to g3. The attack continues, there are threats of discovered checks, knight to f6 and so on. Of course, we haven't delivered mate yet, but a good player understands that here white's position should be much better with such a king. The rook goes to e1, the bishop comes out to f4, and somewhere there, well, not mate, but we keep bringing more pieces into the attack. After all, the king is in a very, very bad position, and king to h8 is an unfortunate move. My opponent decided not to bother calculating all this. Of course, I could have played it safer by moving my bishop away, not leaving it on h7, and then continuing the attack. But I wanted to do it all anyway. Attention! I played d takes e5, which is the computer's second choice, but bishop to g8 was much stronger. That's a move we actually considered, by the way. If the knight takes, then queen to h7, king to f6, and we take on e5. Knight to a5, queen to h8, then king to a7, and the queen could take on a5 and bishop to a3. Well, it's not that obvious, right? If you can't calculate a line all the way to the end, but you see a continuation that's also good, you should definitely go for it. For example, bishop to g8 gives about +6, according to the computer. Taking on e5 is +3, +4, which is also a huge advantage. The opponent played knight to f5, queen to h3, rook to h8, g4. All of that is correct. So here he already needs to play knight to e5, be ready to sacrifice his piece because his king is in a very bad position. And after knight to h6, now knight to e6, we finish off the opponent. We applied all the main rules for choosing a move and calculating variations. In other words, there's absolutely no point in calculating long lines on every move. You need to act based on general rules and principles, understand where to place your pieces, and only calculate variations at those moments when you feel there's something there, some kind of tactic. Follow all the steps that were described in this video. Make use of it.